Welcome to the Parent Guide to GCSE.com podcast. This is episode number 4, and today's guest is Helen Wade.
Right, hello, and welcome to the Parent Guide to GCSE podcast. We are back with you again, and this time round we have the very lovely Helen Wade, who has been a languages teacher for 35 years, which sounds like a very long time, I gotta say.
It is a very long time.
Bless you. I think you probably get less time for killing someone, don't you? Wow. So, we are here today to talk all things languages and languages GCSE, so French, German, Spanish, possibly even some of the more unusual languages, because they all tend to be, I think, much of a muchness in terms of what you do and how you do it. You have kind of languages that you teach more than others, don't you? So what's your...
I teach French and German GCSE. So basically there are 4 skills for each of the modern languages anyway, which are listening, speaking, reading and writing. And with the new GCSE, they are all weighted at 25% each, so they are all of equal value.
Okay, awesome. And you were we were talking earlier, and you were saying there was another big change for the new GCSE as well, which sounded like a very important one to make sure that we mentioned.
That all of the instructions are now given in the target language. In the old days, the instructions were given in English, which made it easier for pupils to understand what was going on. Particularly on the writing now, that you have to understand exactly what it is the exam board is asking you to write about. And that is something that comes with practice, so looking at past papers, looking at what the instructions are, but also the specification for the exam board you're doing should give you the list of the rubrics for particularly the listening and the reading exams. So tick this, answer that, write out in the right language. Always answer the question in the correct language. It will tell you which one it wants the answer in. Otherwise you don't get any marks.
So given that it is a change, a recent change, are there lots of examples on the exam board websites of previous papers? Or is it so new that there's probably not going to be a wealth of resources?
We're into our second full year, but the exam board should have specimen papers as well. And a lot of the revision guides give a list of what the rubrics are as well on the inside cover, so to practice.
Yeah, it's definitely on the specifications. There's a whole list of, as well as all the vocabulary, there's a list of, this is the instruction, this is what it means in English, so that you can make sure you know those. So if you learn nothing else in the run-up, those would be a really good place to start, right?
And and I think also on the listening and reading, for example, make sure if it says put a cross, you can put a cross in the right box. And always follow the instructions that they're giving you to do. So if it wants a word in German, you write a word in German. If they want it in English, you write it in English. But it is those little details, mainly because the papers are put through scanners rather than marked by a human. So if you don't put the right cross in the right box or in the right place, then the chances are you'll lose your marks.
Possibly a stupid question, but I'm assuming you see this happening quite a lot still.
Yes. Yes,
so
we do.
Marks very easily, very quickly lost.
If it says tick 4 boxes and there are 8 possibilities and you tick all 8, you get nothing because they take off a mark for every extra cross or tick that you put. So if you tick all 8, then you'll lose 4. You gain 4, lose 4. So always make sure that you do exactly what the instructions are. And on the front of the paper, it also shows you how to cross out if you've made a mistake, so that again won't lose you a mark.
It does sound like teaching grannies to suck eggs, but at the same time it's 3 marks or 3 marks lost, I suppose.
Yeah.
Well, and you get to that point, I think, when you've been sat doing a bunch of exam papers all in a row, when you're in the middle of mocks or whether you're in the middle of the actual exams, you sit there and you're like, oh, it's another exam. You don't necessarily read through all the instructions because you're too busy going, oh my gosh, I've forgotten what that word was that I'm supposed to be remembering, and panicking before you can then open your paper. So something I know I always used to teach kids to do in maths is to read through the instructions really, really, really thoroughly, make the most of that little bit of time before you're allowed to then open up your paper and crack on. So.
It's silly things like, for example, in German, if you're ticking true and false, It's true in English, but it's richtig in German, so they want you to write R and not T. Now, sometimes they'll give you the benefit of the doubt, but if they want R and F, then make sure you put R and F and not T and F. It's silly things like that.
And so is that made clear in the instructions?
The instructions are there, and it's always in bold.
So there's no excuse?
No, there is no excuse, but if your brain is thinking true, false, and you don't put R, you put T, then...
And you're under pressure, you're in an exam. Okay.
There's a danger of losing a simple mark.
Yeah.
We were also talking earlier, if we're looking at exam technique on the listening exam, the first 5 minutes are reading time, and that's actually read out in the beginning of the exam, which says you now have 5 minutes to read through your paper, and those are the most valuable 5 minutes of the whole exam. The paper is yours. You can annotate anything. Don't write anything on the bits where you have to put your final answer, but look at the pictures, label up the pictures in the language of what you think they're going to. So weather symbols, for example, go through and write down the weather in the target language so you know what you're listening out for. Different sports, or just go through and anticipate what the answer could possibly be, because on the listening exam, just actually working out what the possibilities are can give you an advantage. So just giving an example, you're on the way to the airport and you hear this announcement on the radio. Well, it's likely to be an accident on the motorway or a traffic jam, or if you're going to the airport, it could be fog. And if you anticipate what the possibilities could be when you hear them, then it becomes so much easier.
Yes,
those
using
sort of
your
things.
time wisely. Yeah.
Using those 5 minutes, the most valuable 5 minutes on the listening paper.
Yeah, I think because I know certainly I'd be nervous about writing anything on my bit of paper if I wasn't sure whether I was allowed to or not, because it's always a little bit scary in exams, and it doesn't matter how many times you give the instructions, because they're seeing so many exams all in one block. It all kind of blurs together, I think.
But it actually comes over the audio file. It says you can write on your paper at any time, and that includes those first 5 minutes. The students who do themselves a disservice are the ones who just sit and gaze about and don't even open the paper. Those 5 minutes are the most valuable part of the listening paper.
It's always very frustrating sitting at the front of an exam, watching them start off. They've been briefed, they should know what to do, and you can still see people who are not making the most of the time. So yeah, it's a good hint that they should know about, frankly. But
they should be told over and over again. Ours certainly are.
So it's down to whether they listen then, isn't it?
Yeah.
Speaking of listening, so when in fact maybe speaking of speaking, it's speaking and listening that's first, isn't it? Or are they together?
The speaking exam, it's not a speaking and listening like English. Okay. It is speaking separate completely. They are done out of the main exam period, so between April and May. The school can select when they do those, and those are usually done with your teacher, so you've not got that worry of meeting somebody you don't know and speaking a strange language to them. The board, we do AQA. We don't mark the exams, we just listen and facilitate. So we don't sit there scribbling notes or trying to work out what grade it is. We're literally just talking to our students to try and get the very best out of them on the speaking test. I'm assuming that most boards are the same, but for AQA, for example, the first question is a photograph that you have to give, describe the photograph. You're given 3 questions in advance, and then the teacher will ask 2 other ones. Then you get a role play to do again, and usually there's an unknown question, something that you don't know is coming. The teacher will ask, and you have to respond to, and at some point you have to ask a question. All of these things can be prepared in advance. What we do in our school is that we've gone through every past paper, we've looked at all the unknown questions, and we've looked at everything that they have to write, make a question up about, and so that we've got all those ready to practice. The other part of the exam is the conversation, and your teachers should be preparing you with the type of questions that you're going to be asked in the exam, which means that you can prepare your answers in advance. So the speaking test, although it's the most daunting, because unlike teachers, students tend not to like talking very much. It is the bit of the exam, the 25%, that is the most easily prepared for, particularly on the conversation questions, which you should have at least an idea of what's coming in advance. On AQA, you can choose your favourite topic area to come first, and then you know what the other two topic areas are too. So if you make the effort to prepare your answers in advance, then there should be no surprises on that at all.
So in terms of revision, how would you suggest students best revise for that particular aspect?
The key thing is knowing the topic areas. So AQA, for example, has got 3 broad topic areas, and we come up with a range of questions that meet the criteria for those topic areas. Basically, you need to be making sure that you give opinions, that you can talk about something in the future, talk about something in the past. Most of it is connected to your own experiences, so past holidays, future holidays, school opinions about favourite subjects, what you wear for school.
So this is something you can pre-prepare?
All you can prepare. Your teachers should be giving you a list of not necessarily the actual questions they're going to ask, but a list of the sort of questions that you can prepare.
So, and once you've prepared what you think is your answer, your teacher can check that it's correct.
Yes.
And at that point,
you can learn it off by heart.
Revise it.
Learn it off by heart.
Okay. And test yourself regularly.
Yep.
Get somebody else to test you regularly. Parents, possibly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Make your own recording of it. You can listen to it back, and that'll help you remember it as well. Because there should be no surprises. The only surprises in the speaking test really are the 2 extra questions that go with the photograph, but they are based around the same topic areas that you've prepared anyway. So there's a very good chance that those 2 extra questions could be things that you've prepared as part of your general conversation. So, for example, in our board, then you've got 3 broad topic areas. You select which one you want to be asked on first, and you can either choose the one you're least confident on because you can prepare that more thoroughly so there's no surprises. That's what I advise my students to do. And then over the picture and the second topic area, the other 2 topic areas will be covered. So that's how you can guarantee that you're prepared for every eventuality, because you know that all 3 topic areas will be covered in the exam somewhere. The only random bit is the role play, but that again is based around things that you've learnt in lessons, and that's the lowest scoring part of the exam as well, the role play. So,
just going back to what you said about recording yourself, we had a podcast the last two podcasts ago about it was Kamal talking about recording himself and making silly voices. And how he'd laugh with a friend as they're busy sort of making up these ridiculous voices to remember things. But when it came to the exam, they knew everything. That was to do with English language, English literature, sorry. But the same principle can apply. As long as you have a phone in your pocket pretty much all the time, you can record yourself, you can play it back whenever. If you do it enough, you will start remembering. If you put a particular silly voice on.
Some students sing it. They learn it to tunes. Yeah.
Whatever works, but it's just making sure that you are working hard to find a way that works for you as a student.
The idea is that you should not prepare it all off by heart in advance, but unless you are heading for 9s, the chances are you will really have to learn it off by heart unless you're a native speaker, and it's your teacher's job there to make it sound as though it's not being learned off by heart. So that's how I see myself as a facilitator, that I can go, oh, lovely, oh, brilliant, oh, really, and make it sound like we're having a conversation, whereas the student has learnt it all off by heart. But that's the teacher's job to make it sound like a natural conversation.
And with the speaking bits, so the topics that they get in advance and things like that, when should they expect to have found those? Because I know our friend mentioned her son did GCSEs last year, and she was quite frustrated that to find that he'd been struggling with his French, and he was trying to prepare for his, I'm pretty sure, his speaking test, and she only found out the week before that he had 3 specific subject or topics or questions that he was supposed to be focusing around, because they've got a friend who speaks fluent French, and he could have gone and done some conversation practice with her, and that would have been super easy, but he just hadn't mentioned it to his mum.
The topic areas are covered throughout the whole course, so the order in which the areas are taught over the 2-3 years of GCSE doesn't mean that those are the way the topics are organised. So for example, in our course we started off talking about education, and then bits of that come in one topic area, but bits of it come in a different topic area. So in the board that I teach, it's me, myself, I, so that's all about you, family, things that interest you. Then there's education and future career, so and jobs. So those come in 2 different units or 3 different units in the book, but they come into one area for the topic. And then it's social issues, home life, home and abroad. So they may all be taught at different times over the 2 to 3 years, but they are clumped together for the purposes of the exam. So I teach suitable questions at the end of each unit that I teach, but at some point just after Christmas we will start presenting the students to the questions in their 3 topic areas so they can start working on them. My idea is that they have more answers available to them than they actually need. Just thinking about it, always look at the heading which is given in English so you know which topic area the questions are going to come in. That's another little tip, because and look at the pictures as well. You know, doesn't matter which part of the exam it is, they often put a picture or an advert or a clue or something, a title in English, and that will direct your thoughts to the area of the course that you're supposed to be listening out for or reading about. So little clues like that, little hints.
Okay. With things like more or less the main thing, vocabulary. What's the top tip for expanding your? I mean, and where do you find the list of words that students need to know?
They are on the specifications, I believe, but AQA produces a grey book which we provide to the students, so at foundation level or higher level. It's not exhaustive, but basically the exam board cannot ask you to produce a direct answer unless that word or phrase is on their list of known vocabulary. And if there's a word in a text that they don't expect you to know, then they will put an asterisk and translate it for you. But those grey books in for AQA, I'm sure other colours are available for different boards, but that is the absolute core vocabulary. So in the booklet that we use, the beginning of it is all high frequency words, and those just have to be learned. But there's little sections like geographical features. So, if, for example, in German, they expect you to know that the Baltic Sea has a different name in German from Baltic, that Lake Constance has a different name from Lake Constance, that the English Channel doesn't sound like the English Channel. They expect you to know that the Danube is the Donau, which is one that they wouldn't expect you to know. So there are very specific geographical features in the 2 syllabuses that I know in French and German that are so different from the English that they expect you to learn those and know them, and they can throw those in a listening reading and expect you to know what they are. So it's those little sections, but the front part of the booklet is all the high frequency verbs, all the high frequency adjectives, and then the rest of the book is divided up into the sections that are pertinent to each chapter that we teach. So subject-specific vocabulary.
Excellent. And in terms of learning vocab, do you have any websites that you particularly suggest, or are you much more of a grey book?
I'm very much, after 35 years, I'm very much pen and paper. There is, however, and my brain will come back to it, there is an app that students can use.
We've suggested previously Memrise does languages, Duolingo.
Not that one.
It's
one that creates games with vocabulary, and teachers have put in on all of the vocabulary required for each of the specifications.
We'll find it and we'll
We'll
put it
find
in the
it.
show
Yes,
notes. It's going to be okay.
my I mean, basic vocabulary. The old primary school look right cover check is cover right check even is the best way of actually putting vocabulary into your heads, because you need to know. There's the booklet that we use has got it divided up: vocabulary for listening and reading, so vocabulary you need to recognise more than use, and then extra vocabulary for writing and speaking, so things that you're expected to be able to use yourself. So those are the two different ways of looking at things.
I think we had caption pop we found as well, which I quite liked the look of, where you can use it to search for videos in that particular native language, YouTube videos, and then it comes up with so it'll have the line in, say, German and the line in English, and you can choose to blur out one or the other. And so I was looking at the Disney ones because I'm a giant Disney nerd, and I was watching something from Hercules, I think, being sung in French, and I was trying to figure out how many of those words I could actually have figured out without looking at the subtitles. And you can choose which one to switch, and it's got quite nice little controls, so you can go back a line and repeat things and stuff. I thought that might be just a slightly different way to try and expand vocabulary
Songs,
as
music.
well.
I mean, my own children have learnt most of their language through French musicals. My younger daughter particularly likes German cartoons and fairy tales, and she can recite whole passages in German of these weird little German fairy tales, and she's even done them in Dutch and Chinese as well, just through curiosity, and you can find those on YouTube. Both French and German mainstream TV do the equivalent of CBeebies or CBBC. So on German TV, for example, it's tv.de, so TIVI.de, and it's got all the children's programs, but it's also got things like Newsround, and so it's just 10 minutes of the news items for the day, which are at a level and the speed that would come up on your listening exam, for example. But it's got pictures, and then it explains things like unemployment or global warming and all of these things that could come up in your exam, but for kids. And it's very graphic, and it explains things really clearly. And then it's got the weather forecast, and that is another section of the listening or reading exam. So it's out there, but it's at the right sort of vocabulary level for GCSE as well. So those are little hints too.
Thank you.
Yeah, that sounds like a very good shout.
I was going to say that the one, I think the exam which is the most challenging is the writing exam. Over 2 levels, so either foundation or higher level, as the whole exam is. It is the bit that if you don't understand what the instructions are, then that is where you're going to struggle, because it's so many marks are based on content. So, for example, the first question on the board that I do on the foundation writing is a photograph, but that links directly to the speaking as well. So it's the same sort of skill. You literally have to say what's on the photograph, 2 marks, 4 sentences. You either said it really well, you've got an idea, or you wrote nothing. If you write nothing, you get nothing. That's the absolute key thing through the whole of the writing paper. Then there's a 40-word piece of writing that is worth the same as the 90 words. So you've got 16 marks on the AQA board for writing 40 words. And there are 4 things you have to cover. You don't have to be complicated with tenses or anything like that. So you've got 16 marks, 10 marks for content, i.e. you've done 40 words and you've mentioned all the 4 things that you need to mention, and then 6 for accuracy. That should be an absolute gift. And so you've got 8 marks for writing 4 sentences about a picture, and another 16 then for doing 40 words. That should be an absolute gift on those 2 parts of the paper. Then you've got 5 sentences to translate, and you know there's going to be a past tense in there. There's probably going to be a future. There's going to be an awkward connective word in there somewhere. But again, you can get almost full marks with making mistakes. So that's another 10 marks. And then the most challenging part of the foundation paper is the 90-word question. and it is covering the content that is the key. You will have 4 areas to cover. There will be a future tense part of it, there will be a past tense part of it, and the mark schemes, how the thing is marked, is on the website. It's on the each board's specification, so you can see what it is you have to put in there. But on the content is 10 marks again, but you have to cover all 4 bullet points to even get 7 out of 10. So that's the absolute key. You don't. It's 90 words. If you only do 45 words, you'll only have access to half of the marks. So try as best you can to expand. You don't have to deal with all 4 bullet points with the same weighting. So if 2 look meatier than the other 2, as long as you've mentioned things on the other 2, you've got access to the full range of marks. So that's another 10 marks in the bag by just meeting the word count and mentioning all 4 areas as best you can. But just remember, there will be a future tense, there will be a past tense, you have to give opinions throughout, then you've got access to 10 marks. And then the accuracy, well, it says you've got to mention 3 time frames. So as long as you put some future tense, some past tense and some present tense in there, you've made an attempt at 3 time frames. You don't have to get it right. So you can get access to almost full marks by making mistakes all the way through. So that's the foundation writing. It should be very doable as long as you've done your preparation and know your mark scheme. The higher level is more tricky, particularly the second question, which is about 150 words long, because it doesn't give you a framework. It just gives you 2 bullet points. You have to then build in your own little checklist, and your teacher should probably give you this, a little checklist of things that you need to add in. So all of your tenses, make sure you put some I'm thinking in German, some clever connectives in there, some that send the verb to the end, some that don't, so you're just showing off. So you should have a nice little list in the corner, and I took my O-levels many years ago, and we did exactly the same thing. We had a list of 10 things in the margin, and we just ticked them off as we put them in, and that's what the new GCSE is, more or less the same, because you have to put your own framework in there.
So as soon as you turn the paper over, put the list down.
Yeah, and then construct your story around the grammar framework. That's what you need to be doing for the 151.
Tick as you go.
And just make sure you cover both bullet points, because if you don't cover both bullet points, you can't access the full content marks again.
Those connectives that you've mentioned a couple of times, I presume they're in the grey book under the section connectives?
Yes, and they're also on the grammar part of the specification as well.
Important. Now the other thing that we said we needed to make sure we remembered to mention was context. So we were talking about the fact that kids nowadays don't necessarily get the opportunity to go to the country that speaks their tongue, their language that they're learning, which can sometimes be a little bit of a disadvantage.
Yep. The basis of the GCSE is that you are travelling to that country, so you know an awful lot of the cultural information about it. So that is an area where you could actually use the internet for good purposes and think. For example, they expect you to know about the school system. So if it were France, for example, they expect you to know that they do a long school day, but on most Wednesdays they're not at school. Sometimes they do Saturday mornings to compensate for that. They don't wear a school uniform. They'd expect you to know what the names of the exam systems are. Germany, morning school predominantly, so they start really early, but they finish at lunchtime. They would expect you to know again that there's no uniform on the continent in schools. They would expect you to know the major celebratory days, so the days where the national holidays are. In France, Germany, Italy, Spain, wherever those are, and they expect you to know what people do on those days. But they have done my own daughter's GCSE listening. There was a whole section on travelling down the motorway and having a télépéage badge, which opened the barriers you got there. Now, she's fortunate. She's been travelling down through France since she was born, and so she knew what the context was, but none of her friends knew that because they'd never been in a car travelling down through the country. Food specialities. There's a whole section of the syllabus on customs and celebrations. If you're speaking German, then you need to make sure you know customs in Switzerland and Austria as well, the major towns in Switzerland and Austria, the main geographical features, because again, those contextualise. But it's the school one really, that there's always something about schools and exams and that sort of thing.
So any other hints and tips, anything else we need to know?
The one thing which puts students under pressure is, particularly I find in the higher reading exams where there are long passages, that students tend to look at the people around them and think they need to be moving more quickly through the paper than they need to. So you need to put yourself into like a little box and only focus on what you're doing on your exam paper, and take no notice of those people who are whipping through. If the exam higher reading, for example, is an hour long, it needs 55 minutes of hard work on it. If you finish it in 15, then you've not given it any respect. And I did experiment with this some years ago with a student who'd got a D or an E on the paper when he'd sat in the exam hall, and I knew he was better than that, so I then didn't mark his paper, gave him the same paper back in a quiet room at lunchtime, and he got a B on it. Same paper, no more hints, no more revision. And I said, what's the difference? He said, I was watching everybody else turn the pages and I felt I wasn't going fast enough. So you've got to put yourself into a little bubble and just focus exactly on what you're doing. But particularly the higher reading papers, they need a lot of respect because they're full of tricks. And there's now a literary section of those as well. In German, they still tend to be going back to the old Grimm's fairy tales. So look for a few hints of stories that you might recognise and go back and think, oh, that could be about that, or that could be about that. But the language will be different on the literary section, and you will have to answer that in the target language as well. So see if you can find the right sentence and more or less copy it out verbatim. You've got a good chance of getting some marks. If you leave a gap, you'll get nothing. So always write something rather than nothing.
Okay, good.
Right. I think I've run out of questions. Have you run out of questions?
I think I have run out of questions. Some really, really good hints and tips. So thank you very
I
much.
hope so, and all the best. Bonne chance. Alles Gute.
Thank you very much for being up with us. If you'd like to know more about how you can support your child through their GCSEs, then head over to parentguidetogcse.com. See you next time.